Today, I will walk through how to complete the revised Gateway Balance Sheet Checklist. As of July 1st, 2022, the revised balance sheet checklist is now a DLS Gateway form that must be completed as part of the Bureau of Accounts Free Cash Certification Review process. Prior to this revision, the balance sheet checklist was an Excel spreadsheet that communities needed to complete and upload. The Bureau of Accounts uses the information reported on the checklist to gather additional financial data and to identify other potential reductions to free cash. Your Bureau of Accounts field representative also utilizes the data to prove your community's calculated free cash figure. During this presentation, I will walk through how to complete the 20 questions that appear on the revised balance sheet checklist. Question 1 is a yes or no answer, asking if there are any unrecorded property tax refunds due to taxpayers as of June 30th. If you answer no, move on to the next question. A yes answer means that your community has unrecorded property tax refunds due to taxpayers, and you are required to input the amount of the total refunds. The total amount of the property tax refunds is a reduction to free cash. Please keep in mind that all yes or no radio buttons questions default to no on the checklist. Question 2 is a yes or no answer, asking if the community has accrued property tax revenue on the combined balance sheet. This question refers to the 60-day accrual. If you answer no, move on to the next question. A yes answer means that the 60-day accrual entry for property taxes was made, and you are required to enter the amount of accrued property tax revenues. This question is specifically looking for general fund property tax accruals and not any old accruals that may be on your books. Remember, if you answer yes to questions 1 or 2, you must insert a figure to submit the balance sheet checklist. Question 3 is a yes or no answer, asking if the amounts due to and due from on the combined balance sheet offset each other. A yes answer means that the due to amounts equal the due from amounts. A no answer means they are not equal, and your community's Bureau of Accounts field representative will send your balance sheet back to you for updating. If there is an unexplained variance, the amount will be a reduction to free cash. Question 4 is a yes or no answer, asking if all payables, including payroll and encumbrances, have been recorded. If you answer yes, move on to the next question. If you answer no, please complete the table below the question by providing the name of the account and the amount. If you did not record an expense on your balance sheet, it would result in a reduction to your community's free cash. Where tables exist on the balance sheet checklist, you can add additional rows by clicking on the Add New Row box below each table. Question 5 is a yes or no answer, asking if all votes from free cash and retained earnings have been recorded on your balance sheet. If you answer yes, move on to the next question. A no answer requires you to indicate the free cash purpose and amount or retained earnings purpose and amount that was not recorded. The total of the free cash votes that have not been recorded is used to reduce our free cash calculation and proof figure to make sure that we are capturing all free cash that has been appropriated. We want to make sure we do not overstate the amount of remaining free cash from the prior fiscal year certification. The total of the retained earnings votes that have not been recorded is used to reduce the retained earnings calculation to make sure that we are capturing all retained earnings amounts that have been appropriated. We want to make sure we do not overstate the amount of retained earnings remaining from the prior fiscal year certification. Question 6 is asking you to report your community's estimated local receipts from page 3 of the tax rate recap and the actual local receipts that will be reported on the upcoming fiscal year recap. Do not report anything from lines 5 through 9 for water, sewer, hospital, trash, or other receipts that are treated as special revenue. The Bureau of Accounts wants to capture general fund revenue only. A positive variance means that your actual local receipts were greater than your estimated local receipts, and this results in a positive impact on your free cash figure. Question 7 is asking you to report the type and amount of any other actual revenue that was received and not reported in question 6 from above. Do not report water, sewer, or other receipts treated as special revenue or tax title and tax foreclosure receivable amounts. Again, DLS is looking to capture any general fund revenue that was received and not reported on page 3 of the tax rate recap. Question 8 is looking for the variance between your estimated and actual cherry sheet receipts. Your community's estimated cherry sheet receipt amount net of offsets automatically populates the balance sheet checklist. Please input your community's actual cherry sheet receipt amount, excluding any MSBA reimbursement. A positive variance impacts free cash favorably, and a negative variance lowers your potential free cash figure. Question 9 is asking you to report your community's other financing sources from other funds to the general fund only. Other financing sources are revenues that are coming into the general fund from other funds. If the other financing source was voted at town meeting, that means the funds were budgeted for the intended purpose. Please report the revenue type, budgeted amount, and actual amount for each. A positive variance impacts your community's potential free cash favorably. Actual revenue sources that are not budgeted flow to undesignated fund balance. By budgeted, we mean any amount voted at town meeting or estimated on the tax rate recap. For example, your community may vote at a town meeting to close an allowable special revenue fund to the general fund. This would be considered an other financing source to the general fund. The budgeted amount would be the amount voted by town meeting, and the actual amount would be the same amount voted at town meeting. If the accountant simply closed a special revenue revolving account no longer in use with no town meeting vote taken, the budgeted amount would be $0, and the actual amount would be the amount closed to the general fund. Question 10 is asking you to report your community's other financing uses from the general fund to other funds. Other financing uses are revenues that are going to other funds from the general fund. If the other financing use was voted at town meeting, that means the funds were budgeted for the intended purpose. A positive variance impacts your community's potential free cash unfavorably. When actual revenue uses exceed budgeted amounts, this has a negative impact on your undesignated fund balance. Again, by budgeted, we mean any amount voted at town meeting or estimated on the tax rate recap. Question 11 is asking you to report the total of all unencumbered and unexpended appropriation balances that are returned to the general fund. These unencumbered and unexpended appropriation balances are returned to the general fund undesignated fund balance and have a positive impact on a community's free cash. On your budget to actual expenditure report, this would be the unexpended amount less encumbrances and reserves for continuing appropriations, if not already deducted in the system, plus any fund balances reserved for deficits such as snow and ice. Question 12A is looking to track your free cash appropriations as well as match up the combined balance sheet fund balance reserved for expenditure. The prior year's free cash amount and date certified automatically populate the form. In Section A, report the free cash amounts that were appropriated for the current fiscal year. For each vote date that free cash was appropriated, put the total amount of free cash used. Each different vote date should have its own free cash total. Make sure to include any free cash votes taken in the fall prior to a special town meeting, as well as any subsequent votes from free cash to cover current year expenditures. In Section B, report the free cash amounts that were appropriated for the upcoming fiscal year. For each vote date that free cash was appropriated, put the total amount of free cash used. These free cash votes typically fall into the reserve for expenditure line on your balance sheet and are for the upcoming fiscal year budget. However, the funds are available for expenditure immediately after voted by town meeting and can be spent prior to June 30th and may not be reported as fund balance reserved for expenditure. In Section C, report the detail of your combined balance sheet, fund balance reserved for expenditures. The total of Section C on the balance sheet checklist should equal the total fund balance reserved for expenditure on your combined balance sheet. Report the amount of free cash, overlay surplus, and any other fund that makes up your community's fund balance reserved for expenditure in Part C on the appropriate line. Free cash expended in Part B should agree to the free cash line in Part C. If it does not, please include an explanation. For example, free cash might have been appropriated at annual town or council meeting to the stabilization fund, but the transfer may have occurred prior to June 30th. In this case, the amount of free cash would not be in the fund balance reserved for expenditures. Another possible reason for a variance could be that free cash appropriated at the annual town or council meeting was expended in full or in part prior to June 30th, as free cash is eligible for expenditure at the time of appropriation. The ending balance is the amount of free cash that went unappropriated. A positive balance that remains flows to undesignated fund balance and has a positive impact on the next fiscal year's free cash. Question 12B is looking to track your retained earnings appropriations as well as match up the enterprise fund combined balance sheet fund balance reserved for expenditure. The prior year's retained earnings amount and date certified automatically populate the form. In Section A, report the retained earnings amounts that were appropriated for the current fiscal year. For each vote date that a retained earnings was appropriated, put the total amount of retained earnings used. Each different vote date should have its own retained earnings total. Make sure to include any retained earnings votes taken in the fall prior to a special town meeting, as well as any subsequent votes from retained earnings to cover current year expenditures. In Section B, report the retained earnings amount that were appropriated for the upcoming fiscal year. For each vote date that retained earnings was appropriated, put the total amount of retained earnings used. These retained earnings votes typically fall into the reserve for expenditure line on your enterprise fund balance sheet and are for the upcoming fiscal year budget. However, the funds are available for expenditure immediately after voted by town meeting and can be spent prior to June 30th and may not be reported as fund balance reserved for expenditure. In Section C, report the detail of your enterprise fund combined balance sheet fund balance reserved for expenditures. The total of Section C on the balance sheet checklist should equal the total fund balance reserved for expenditure on your enterprise fund combined balance sheet detail. Report the amount of retained earnings and any other funds that make up your community's fund balance reserved for expenditure. The amount in Part C should also agree to the total of Part B. Please provide an explanation if it does not agree. The ending balance is the amount of retained earnings that went unappropriated. A positive balance that remains flows to the enterprise fund's undesignated fund balance and has a positive impact on the next fiscal year's retained earnings amount. You are required to complete Sections A, B, and C for each enterprise fund that you have. For example, if your community has 3 enterprise funds, you will complete 3 separate 12B questions for each enterprise fund. The balance sheet checklist automatically populates the retained earnings amount and date certified for each enterprise fund. Question 13 is asking you to report the amount of unappropriated overlay surplus closed to undesignated fund balance. Please report only unexpended overlay surplus released. When the assessors release an overlay amount to overlay surplus, the amount released can be appropriated for any lawful purpose. If only half of the overlay surplus amount released was appropriated, the remaining half that was not appropriated would close to undesignated fund balance and have a positive impact on your free cash certification. Question 14 is a yes or no answer, looking to determine if your community submitted for Chapter 90 reimbursements prior to September 30th. A no answer means that your community did not submit for reimbursement for any Chapter 90 deficits that appear on your balance sheet by September 30th. In this case, a Chapter 90 deficit that appears on your balance sheet is a reduction to free cash. If you answered yes, that means your community filed for Chapter 90 reimbursements prior to September 30th. In this case, you would upload the requests for reimbursement forms at the bottom of the checklist, and the Bureau of Accounts would give your community credit for the amount requested towards the Chapter 90 deficit that appears on your balance sheet. Question 15, Part A, is asking whether your community is self-insured for health insurance for employees and retirees in the upcoming fiscal year. Part B is asking if your community was self-insured for health insurance for the prior fiscal year. A no answer for both parts A and B mean that your community is part of a group insurance plan, and you can move on to question 16. A yes answer to parts A and B mean that your community is self-insured for health insurance. If you answered yes to part B, you must include amounts for the stop-loss policy deductible, total claims paid in the prior fiscal year, and the incurred but not reported IBNR accrued as of June 30th. Please note that if your community's IBNR is greater than the fund balance at year end, the variance is a reduction to free cash. Question 16, Part A, is asking whether your community is self-insured for any other insurance benefits besides health in the upcoming fiscal year. For example, is your community self-insured for dental? Part B is asking if your community was self-insured for other insurance in the prior fiscal year. A no answer for both parts A and B mean that your community does not carry a self-insurance plan, and you can move on to question number 17. A yes answer to parts A and B mean that your community is self-insured for other benefits other than health insurance. If you answered yes to part B, you must include amounts for the stop-loss policy deductible, total claims paid in the prior fiscal year, and the incurred but not reported, or IBNR, accrued as of June 30th. Question 17 is asking if your community is a member of a regional or county insurance plan. If no, please move on to question 18. If you answer yes, you must input the name of the group provider and the contact information for the plan administrator. Question 18 is asking if your community will have an independent financial audit completed based on the prior fiscal year activities. A no answer means that you will not have an audit conducted, and you can move on to question 19. A yes answer means that you plan to have an audit completed, and you must include the name of the audit firm. The law requires communities that receive more than $750,000 in federal funding within a fiscal year to have an independent audit of their financial statements completed. Question 19 is asking you to input the name of the financial software that your community uses to account for its general ledger activities. Please list the type of financial software that your community uses. Question 20 is a yes or no answer, asking if your community uses an outside payroll vendor. A no answer indicates that all payroll processes are completed by your community staff. A yes answer indicates that a payroll vendor helps your community with its payroll process. If you answered yes, please include the name of the payroll company. At the bottom of the balance sheet checklist, you can add additional comments by clicking on the Add Comment link, upload supporting documentation, such as the Chapter 90 request for reimbursement letter if applicable, and sign the form prior to submitting. Once you have completed all aspects of the checklist, make sure you hit the Submit button. If you have any questions on how to complete the new balance sheet checklist or any other balance sheet forms, please contact your Bureau of Accounts field representative. Contact information and additional resources can be found at mass.gov/DLS.